Laura Mitchell believed her small two-bedroom bungalow in suburban Ohio was filled with love, but she was acutely aware that it was a love waiting for someone to receive it. At 42, the silence in the rooms often felt heavier than the quiet comfort she tried to cultivate. As an elementary school teacher, her days were a vibrant cacophony of laughter, scraped knees, and triumphant shouts of, "I did it!" But when she locked her classroom door, the silence would rush back in, a constant companion on the drive home. The guest room, painted a hopeful, sunny yellow, remained empty, its bed perfectly made, its shelves lined with children's books she'd collected over the years, stories waiting for a listener. Years of fertility treatments had left her with nothing but a depleted savings account and a deep, hollow ache that medical science couldn't fill. This evening, the ache was particularly sharp. She was on the phone with her older sister, Jessica, and the conversation was following a painfully familiar script. "Another parent-teacher conference, Laura? Honestly, I don't know how you do it," Jessica said, her voice dripping with the kind of pity that felt more like a judgment. "All those noisy children, and for what? You need to think about your future. Find a man with some ambition." "I like my job, Jess. I love my students," Laura replied, tracing the rim of her teacup. "And I'm thinking about my future. I told you, I've started the process. I had my initial meeting with the adoption agency last week." A sigh crackled through the phone. "Oh, Laura, are we back on this again? It's a noble idea, I suppose, for other people. But for our family, think of the family name. You don't know what you're getting. These children, they come with baggage. It's a desperate second-rate option for someone who can't have a real family." The phrase real family landed like a physical blow. Laura's knuckles whitened around her cup. "A child who needs a home and a mother who has a home to give sounds very real to me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's not about a name, it's about love." "Love doesn't pay the bills," Jessica retorted breezily. "Robert and I are about to close on the lake house. You should see the deck, it's magnificent. That's what ambition gets you. Not some troubled stranger you picked out of a catalog. You're just setting yourself up for heartbreak. When it all goes wrong, don't come crying to me." Laura closed her eyes. She pictured Jessica in her sprawling, minimalist mansion, a place so sterile and immaculate it looked like no one actually lived there. It was a house, not a home. "I have to go, Jessica. I have papers to grade." "Fine. Just think about what I said. Don't throw your life away." After hanging up, Laura didn't move for a long time. The silence of her house pressed in. Jessica's words, meant to sting and dissuade, had the opposite effect. They clarified everything. She wasn't just filling a void in her own life, she was offering a sanctuary. She looked at the empty yellow room and saw not a symbol of her failure, but a promise. The heartbreak Jessica warned of was nothing compared to the heartbreak of never trying. With a newfound resolve, she picked up the phone again and dialed the number for the adoption agency, ready to schedule her next appointment. She was done waiting. The file on the social worker's desk was thin, a testament to a life with few official connections. "Leo is 8, said Mrs. Gable, a kind woman with weary eyes. "He's been in the system for about 4 years, through 3 different foster homes. They all said the same thing. He's a good boy but quiet, almost completely withdrawn. He doesn't cause trouble, but he doesn't connect." She slid a photograph across the desk. A small, serious-faced boy with large, dark eyes stared back, not at the camera, but somewhere just past it. Large, dark eyes. He was clutching the strap of a worn backpack as if it were a lifeline. Laura felt an immediate, inexplicable pull. She saw not a problem, but a puzzle. A soul that had built walls to protect itself. "I'd like to meet him," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Their first meeting took place in a sterile playroom at the agency. Leo sat on a small plastic chair, his gaze fixed on his own scuffed sneakers. Laura sat near him, not crowding him, and simply talked. She told him about her house, about the big oak tree in the backyard that was perfect for climbing, about her cat, a grumpy old tabby named Gus. She didn't ask him questions, didn't pressure him to speak. For 20 minutes, it was a monologue. Then she pulled a worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit from her bag. "This was my favorite book when I was your age," she said. "Would you mind if I read a little?" Leo gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. As Laura read, she saw his shoulders relax, just a fraction. He still didn't look at her, but he was listening. When she finished the first chapter, he finally spoke. His voice was a soft, unused whisper. "He becomes real," Leo said, more a statement than a question. "Yes," Laura whispered back, her heart swelling. "Because he was loved." The first few weeks after Leo came to live with her were a delicate dance of advance and retreat. He would eat every meal she made without complaint, but would retreat into silence for hours. The one constant was a small, tarnished silver locket he wore on a chain around his neck. He never took it off, clutching it in his sleep and fiddling with it when he was nervous. Laura, recognizing it as his only link to a past he couldn't articulate, never asked about it. She simply accepted it as a part of him. She focused on creating routines, on making him feel safe. They planted a small garden in the backyard. They read a chapter of a book every night. They watched old movies on Saturday afternoons. One evening, about a month in, Laura was tucking him into bed in the sunny yellow room. He was already half asleep. "Mom?" he mumbled, the word so new and fragile it almost broke her heart. "I'm here, sweetie," she said, smoothing his hair. "Thank you for the book," he whispered, his eyes fluttering closed. He wasn't talking about the Velveteen Rabbit. He was talking about all of it. The room, the food, the quiet presence, the love. In the dim light from the hallway, Laura saw him clutch the silver locket. For the first time, she felt she wasn't just a woman with a child in her house. She was a mother. She and Leo, in their quiet little bungalow, were finally becoming real. The air in Jessica and Robert Clark's cavernous dining room was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and unspoken tension. Laura had hesitated for weeks before accepting the Thanksgiving invitation, but she'd felt a misguided obligation to try, for Leo's sake, to maintain some semblance of family. It was a mistake. From the moment they arrived, Jessica had treated Leo like an unpleasant stain on her pristine white carpet. She'd directed her greetings only to Laura, while Robert gave Leo a cursory nod before turning away to talk loudly about the stock market. Leo, now a quiet but observant 9-year-old, clung to Laura's side, his small hand gripping hers. He was wearing his best collared shirt, and Laura had spent an hour that morning polishing his silver locket until it gleamed, wanting him to feel proud. But under the judgmental gaze of his new aunt and uncle, he seemed to shrink. The final straw came during dessert. An elderly aunt, bless her heart, turned to Leo with a kind smile. "And what do you want to be when you grow up, young man?" Before Leo could even open his mouth, Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, who knows what he'll be. Laura seems to think bringing a troubled stranger into the family is some kind of charity project." The table fell silent. Forks clinked against plates. Laura's blood ran cold. "Jessica, that is completely inappropriate," she said, her voice low and trembling with anger. But Jessica was on a roll, her voice rising with theatrical indignation. "Inappropriate?" Her voice. "What's inappropriate is polluting our family bloodline with God knows what. We have a reputation, a family name to uphold. I told you this was a mistake, Laura. You're so desperate for a child you bring home a stray and expect us all to just accept it?" She gestured wildly at Leo, who had frozen, his face pale. "I will not have this boy associated with the Clark family name. It's a disgrace." Robert placed a placating hand on his wife's arm, but his expression was one of smug agreement. "Now, honey, she's still your sister." "No," Jessica snapped, shaking him off. Her eyes, cold and furious, locked onto Laura's. "Not anymore. As of this moment, you are no longer my sister. I am officially disowning you. I want nothing to do with you or that boy." The final 2 words hung in the air, ugly and venomous. A tear slipped down Leo's cheek, a silent testament to the cruelty of the blow. That was it. Laura stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the polished hardwood floor. She pulled a stunned Leo to his feet, her grip firm and protective. "You're right about one thing, Jessica," Laura said, her voice shaking but clear as a bell. "We're not your family, and we are leaving." She didn't look at anyone else. She wrapped her arm around Leo's shoulders and walked out of the house, leaving behind the scent of turkey, the shards of her old family, and the suffocating silence of people who chose wealth over love. On the drive home, Leo finally broke his silence. "She was wrong," he whispered, his hand on his locket. "You're my real family." Laura reached over and squeezed his hand, her own tears finally falling. "Yes, we are," she said. "Just you and me." 10 years can transform a sapling into a sturdy tree, and so it was with Leo. The quiet, withdrawn boy had grown into a brilliant, kind, and self-assured young man of 18. The decade since that disastrous Thanksgiving had not been without its challenges. Nightmares, struggles with trust, the inevitable questions about his past. But Laura's unwavering devotion had been the constant, fertile ground in which he could finally set down roots. Her small house, once a silent vessel of hope, was now filled with the easy laughter of a mother and son, the sound of Leo practicing his guitar, and the comfortable chaos of a life fully lived. He had not just grown, he had thrived. Excelling in school, he'd discovered a passion for science and engineering, his sharp mind a perfect match for complex problems. Laura had nurtured his curiosity, spending her modest teacher's salary on robotics kits and advanced textbooks. Her investment paid off spectacularly. Leo had just been awarded the prestigious Harrison Scholarship, a full ride to one of the country's top engineering universities. Laura felt a swell of pride so immense it almost hurt. She stood at the kitchen counter, the local newspaper spread out before her. There, on the front page of the community section, was a large color photograph. It was of her and Leo, standing in their backyard under the old oak tree. She was beaming, her arm around his shoulders, while he smiled at the camera with a relaxed confidence that was the culmination of a decade of love. The headline read, "Local Foster Child to Future Engineer, Leo Mitchell Wins Harrison Scholarship." The reporter had written a touching piece about his journey, and in her pride, Laura had mentioned the one detail she usually kept private. The article noted, "Mitchell, who has never known his biological family, still wears the one link to his past. A unique silver locket he has had since he was a baby, a symbol of a history he has overcome through perseverance and the love of his adoptive mother." "You're staring at it again, Mom," Leo said, walking into the kitchen and grabbing an apple from the bowl. "I can't help it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm just so proud of you, Leo." He smiled, a genuine warm expression that lit up his face. "I couldn't have done it without you." None of it. He glanced at the photo and unconsciously touched the locket at his throat, a habit that had never faded. "It's funny. I used to stare at this thing for hours, wondering who gave it to me, where I came from, but somewhere along the way, it stopped mattering as much." He looked at her, his dark eyes clear and sincere. "You gave me a future. That's 1,000 times more important than some mystery from the past." Laura's heart ached with love. He was right. They had built their own history, their own family, their own future. Nothing could be more real or more precious than that. They had everything they needed. The peaceful rhythm of a Tuesday evening was shattered by a sharp, insistent knock on the front door. Laura and Leo exchanged a puzzled glance over their dinner plates. They weren't expecting anyone. Leo got up to answer it, and a moment later, 2 figures stepped into the warm light of the living room, looking as out of place as ghosts at a feast. It was Jessica and Robert Clark. The 10 years since Laura had last seen them had not been kind. The arrogant sheen of wealth had been stripped away, replaced by a dull film of desperation. Jessica's designer dress was wrinkled, and her perfectly coiffed hair was showing roots. Robert's expensive suit hung on him, and his face was sallow and etched with worry lines. They looked like deflated balloons. "Laura," Jessica began, forcing a smile that didn't reach her weary eyes. "And Leo? My, look at you. All grown up." The attempt at familiarity was jarring. "Jessica, Robert? What are you doing here?" Laura asked, her voice flat. She remained seated, making no move to welcome them further. "We were just in the neighborhood," Robert said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He surveyed the modest living room with a familiar disdain. "Still in this cozy little box, I see." "Quaint," "We like our home," Leo said, his voice a low, steady rumble that was no longer a child's whisper. He stood with his arms crossed, a protective wall in front of his mother. The pleasantries evaporated. "Look, Laura, we're in trouble," Jessica blurted out, her composure cracking. "Robert's business. There were some bad investments, a market downturn. It's all gone. The house, the cars, everything. We're bankrupt." Laura listened, her expression unreadable. She felt a distant, detached sort of pity, but no sympathy. They had sowed the seeds of their own isolation a decade ago. "We need your help," Robert said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Just a loan. 100,000 maybe? To get back on our feet. For family. After all, blood is thicker than water." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Laura finally stood up, her eyes flashing. "Family? Blood? You burned that bridge 10 years ago, Robert. You stood by and let your wife disown me and humiliate my son. You made it very clear that we weren't your family. That was a long time ago." "A misunderstanding?" Jessica pleaded, her voice growing shrill. "He wasn't really your son then, it was all new. But you have to help us. Where else are we supposed to go?" "I imagine that's a problem you'll have to solve on your own," Leo said, his tone as cold as ice. "My mother has spent the last decade taking care of me. She doesn't owe you a thing." Just as Jessica opened her mouth to unleash what was sure to be a torrent of abuse, a low, powerful rumble filled the quiet street. The sound of an engine, deep and expensive, silenced them all. Headlights swept across the living room window, and through the thin curtains, they could see the impossible sight of a long, sleek black limousine pulling to a stop directly in front of Laura Mitchell's humble home. The sight of the limousine was so incongruous, so utterly alien to their quiet suburban street, that it felt like a scene from a movie. For a moment, everyone in Laura's living room was frozen in stunned silence. The argument between the Clarks and the Mitchells died in their throats, replaced by a shared sense of bewilderment. Clarks and the Mitchells. A chauffeur in a crisp, black uniform emerged from the driver's side, walked around the back of the vehicle with unhurried grace, and opened the rear passenger door. An elegant, elderly gentleman stepped out. He was tall and lean, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Laura's car. His hair was a shock of thick, white, and he leaned lightly on a silver-headed cane, though he moved with an air of authority that suggested the cane was more of an accessory than a necessity. His face was lined with age and a deep, abiding sadness, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. He was flanked by a younger man in a similar suit, who held a leather briefcase. Robert Clark's jaw went slack. He let out a small, strangled gasp of recognition. "My God," he whispered, his voice filled with a reverence that bordered on fear. That's Arthur Sterling." The name meant nothing to Laura, but the effect it had on her brother-in-law was profound. The desperate beggar was gone, replaced in an instant by a fawning, sycophantic admirer. The elderly man and his assistant walked up the short path to the front door, which Leo still held open. Arthur Sterling's gaze swept past the Clarks as if they were furniture, landing first on Laura, then on Leo. His sharp eyes softened, and a flicker of something unreadable, hope perhaps, passed across his face. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice a rich, cultured baritone that commanded attention. "My name is Arthur Sterling. Am I correct in assuming this is the residence of Laura and Leo Mitchell?" "Yes," Laura said, finding her voice. "I'm Laura Mitchell, and this is my son, Leo." Sterling's eyes lingered on Leo, a strange intensity in his gaze. "I read an article in your local paper online about a scholarship," he explained, his eyes dropping for a second to the locket at Leo's throat. "It mentioned a young man of remarkable talent and a unique piece of jewelry. May we come in? I have a story I believe you need to hear." His request was polite, but it carried the weight of a royal decree. Leo, sensing the gravity of the moment, stepped back to allow them to enter. Arthur Sterling walked into the small, cozy living room, his presence seeming to shrink the space around him. He gave Robert and Jessica a final, dismissive glance. "Perhaps you two should wait outside," he suggested, his tone leaving no room for argument. Humiliated and confused, Jessica and Robert shuffled back out onto the porch, their petty financial squabbles forgotten. Suddenly extras in a drama they couldn't comprehend. The door closed behind them, leaving Laura, Leo, and the mysterious billionaire to face a truth that was about to change everything. Arthur Sterling sat on Laura's modest sofa, looking perfectly at ease, as if he were in a corporate boardroom. He politely declined Laura's offer of tea and got straight to the point, his gaze fixed on Leo. The air in the room was thick with a heavy, unspoken anticipation. 17 years ago, Arthur began, his voice low and steady, yet trembling with the weight of old grief. I was the happiest man on earth. I had a wonderful daughter, Eleanor, and she had just given me my first and only grandchild, a boy named Leo. Laura's breath caught in her throat. She glanced at her son, whose face had become a mask of stone, his hand instinctively rising to cover the locket at his neck. My daughter's husband had passed away before the baby was born, Arthur continued, his eyes distant with memory. So it was just the three of us. When Leo was 6 months old, he was kidnapped from his nursery. They wanted a ransom. I paid it, every last penny, but they never returned him. The criminals were eventually caught, but they were low-level thugs who claimed the baby had been handed off to someone else. We never found him. The trail went cold. He paused, swallowing hard. The loss destroyed my daughter. She passed away a few years later, they said from pneumonia, but I know it was from a broken heart. I have spent the last 17 years and a significant portion of my fortune searching for my grandson. For Leo. He leaned forward, his intense gaze locking with Leo's. The police had nothing, no fingerprints, no reliable witnesses. All we had was one unique identifier. For his birth, I commissioned a one-of-a-kind silver locket. It was crafted by an artisan in Italy, with a secret. There is a nearly invisible seam along the edge. Slowly, as if in a trance, Leo pulled the locket from under his shirt. With trembling fingers, he handed it to the old man. Arthur took it with a reverence that was heartbreaking to watch. He ran a thumb along the rim, found a tiny catch Laura had never noticed, and with a soft click, the locket sprang open. It was not a locket for pictures. Inside, intricately engraved in the silver, were 2 initials, L.S. Leo Sterling, and below them, a tiny perfectly rendered star, the symbol of his family's corporation, Sterling Enterprises. I have searched the world for this locket, Arthur whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. I hired investigators, followed dead ends, looked into the faces of 1,000 orphans. Then, 2 days ago, an alert I set up years ago for any mention of a boy with a unique locket was triggered by your local newspaper article. He looked up, and for the first time, a genuine, watery smile touched his lips. He held the open locket out to the stunned young man. It's you, Arthur said, his voice breaking. After all these years, you are Leo Sterling, my grandson, and you are the sole heir to everything I have. The room fell silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece, marking the seconds of a life that had just been irrevocably, unimaginably, altered. The weight of Arthur Sterling's revelation settled over the room, a profound silence that seemed to hold 17 years of loss and longing. Leo stared at the open locket, at the initials that claimed him, his mind reeling. He was an heir. He had a history, a name, a grandfather. But as the initial shock began to recede, his gaze lifted and found his mother's. He saw the tears in her eyes, not of jealousy or fear, but of pure, unadulterated joy for him. In that moment, everything became clear. The money, the new name, the powerful grandfather, none of it mattered as much as the woman who had been there all along. He crossed the room in 2 strides and wrapped his arms around Laura, holding her tightly. I already have a family, he said, his voice thick with emotion, loud enough for everyone to hear. You are my mother. You saved me. None of this changes that. This fortune, it's our fortune. I will make sure you are cared for the rest of your life. Laura hugged him back, burying her face in his shoulder, her body shaking with relieved sobs. It was then that the door creaked open. Jessica and Robert, unable to contain their curiosity any longer, slipped back inside. Jessica's face was a twisted mask of greedy calculation. A billionaire's heir? She breathed, her eyes gleaming. Leo, nephew, We are so sorry for that silly misunderstanding all those years ago. We're family after all, and family helps each other. Leo slowly pulled away from Laura and turned to face them. The boy they had once scorned was gone, replaced by a man who now stood with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who knew his own worth. His expression was glacial. Family? He repeated, the word tasting like poison. I remember you telling me I wasn't family. You said I polluted the bloodline. You disowned my mother. You humiliated a child on Thanksgiving. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, cutting tone. You were right about one thing, Jessica. I am not your family. Cutting tone. So don't you ever dare ask me for anything again. As Jessica's face crumpled in horrified disbelief, Arthur Sterling rose slowly from the sofa, his gentle demeanor replaced by one of cold corporate steel. I believe this conversation is over, he said calmly. He looked directly at Robert Clark. My assistant is very thorough. While I was waiting for confirmation, I had him conduct a background check on everyone present. Your bankruptcy, Mr. Clark, wasn't just bad luck or a market downturn, was it? Robert turned pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, Arthur said, his voice like chipping ice. I'm talking about wire fraud, embezzlement from your investors, and a pattern of deception that goes back years. It seems my grandson isn't the only one with a secret history. He nodded to his assistant, who was already on his phone. All the evidence has just been forwarded to the district attorney's office. I imagine they will be in touch shortly. Jessica let out a choked sob as Robert stumbled backward, his face a canvas of pure terror. The full weight of their ruin, not just financial but now criminal, crashed down upon them. Laura and Leo stood together, a united front, watching as the two people who had built their lives on arrogance and cruelty were left with nothing. Their future was secure, built not on bloodlines or billions, but on a decade of unwavering love. The debt of that long-ago Thanksgiving had finally been repaid in full.